This week, the Paul Security Weekly hosts are going to discuss encryption, cryptography, in a segment that I called Kicking Off with Crypto. Then in the security news, ChatGPT writes exploits, banning default and weak passwords, forget vulnerabilities, just get rid of malware, IR blasting for fun and not profit, creating fake people, shattered dreams and passkeys, and removing chips. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. It's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. When it comes to ensuring your company has top-notch security practices, things can get complicated and time-consuming fast. Now you can assess risk, secure the trust of your customers, and automate compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and more with a single platform, Vanta. Vanta's leading trust management platform helps you automate evidence collection, unify risk management, and streamline security reviews. Save hours of work by completing security questionnaires with Vanta AI. Go to securityweekly.com/Vanta to watch their on-demand demo. That's securityweekly.com/VANTA. Make sure you subscribe to the Below the Surface podcast by Eclipsium in partnership with CRA. We've had the pleasure of speaking with some amazing guests, including Zeno Kova, Richard Hughes, Vincent Zimmer, and more. We discuss topics related to firmware and supply chain security, uncovering those pesky vulnerabilities that lie, well, below the surface in your environments. You can find all the episodes and subscribe by visiting eclipsium.com/podcast or searching for Below the Surface in your favorite podcast catcher.
But first, a man who knows what a Polaroid picture is and exactly how to shake it, who hacks all the booze and drinks all the things, a man whose new blockchain venture you definitely want to hear all about, Paul Asadorian.
Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 827, being recorded on Wednesday, May 1st, 2024. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian. Mr. Dave Johnson is here in studio to my left.
Alive. And number 5? I don't know. I had something for that. I didn't plan it, though.
Yeah, you're rocking a vintage, I can't say the name due to trademark infringement, but
a vintage t-shirt.
Gonna have to blur that. It's gonna be blurred out.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I found it right next to my frack t-shirt, and I went with this.
Nice. It's very nice. Very nice. Mr. Bill Swearingen is here with us. Bill, welcome.
Hey, everybody. May the 1st be with you.
You're a little... That was a premature May joke.
Listen, I'm not really much of a Star Wars fan, so I just want to get it out of the way.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us.
Hey, everybody. Hey, we get to talk about one of my favorite topics, cryptography. Or do we?
Yay.
Is encryption still cryptography? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. We could spend the whole segment defining terms, but I want to not do that. Mr. Josh Marpet.
Let's not confuse the issue with facts.
Let's define it all.
No, let's just not define anything and just talk about it.
Sounds good to me.
I think Sam and Lee are joining in the next segment. Is that true? Okay. Well, in any case,
we can't predict the future, Paul.
This is true. Security Weekly listeners, join the digital identity community at the Aria Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, May 28th through the 31st. The 15th annual Identiverse will bring together over 3,000 security professionals for 4 days of world-class learning, engagement, and entertainment. As a community member, receive 25% off your Identiverse 2024 tickets using the code IDV24-SW25. You can register today at securityweekly.com/IDV2024. And we're kicking it off with some crypto. This is our time now in the next couple of months, May and June, hopefully, to dig into some topics on crypto. And I say crypto because then I get marble mouth and I'm cryptography, cryptology, and just crypto. That's what I'm using, Jeff.
Oh, so you want to talk about Bitcoin?
No, I don't want no.
You got to pick one of those big long words and run with it.
I guess
if you just say crypto,
I guess crypto people now, like the cryptocurrency has taken over.
Yeah,
the word crypto.
They kind of co-opted it. Yep,
they did. Well, we're not going to talk about cryptocurrency at all.
Cryptology is the generic term for the discipline.
The study or discipline of
it combines offense and defense.
I gotcha.
Both designing crypto systems,
we've had this,
and breaking or attempting to get to the underlying messages, which is called cryptanalysis.
Enough with the definitions. Come on, man. Who cares about definitions? Let's get to the real meat of the matter.
All right. Back to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm actually more into Solana at the moment. You know. Yeah.
All right.
Or Ethereum.
Some of the topics in the area today, because
Josh you're excited. You're excited.
Dude, this is one of my favorites. I love cryptography because it's fun. Math is awesome in so many ways, and there's so many questions that we have these days. I mean, you want to talk cryptography? Actually, cryptocurrency has cryptographic pieces in it, and it's fascinating to discuss those aspects and how it's similar to GitHub in a lot of ways. But we'll leave that alone. But then you want to talk about quantum decryption, and that's a huge topic. I've taken a lot of calls on that in the past, let's say, year and a half. It's a monstrous topic, and the real problem there is the timeline. When should I care? Okay, and we'll discuss that. I mean, but there's so many topics, like how is cryptography advancing? How is it evolving? You know, in our lifetimes, you know, Jeff, you were just honored for the cipher wheel that you built.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start.
When did I design that?
Yeah, when was that?
1987 is when I first came up with the idea, and we fielded it in, I think, 1988. Best as I can remember.
To be clear, Jeff, what was it named, and who did you get honored by just now?
So it was a cryptographic aid. It was a cipher wheel, much like the little Orphan Annie decoder ring. It was designed for use by the U.S. Special Forces. They used something that was called a one-time pad, which is unbreakable encryption if you use it correctly. You always have to put that caveat in. But they used it from 1988 up into the early 2000s. And what happened was on Monday, a display of cipher wheels was put out at the National Cryptologic Museum, which is right outside of NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland. And my wheel, which was technically called the HAL-001 Visioneer cipher wheel, it was put on display at the museum. The Special Forces called it the Whiz Wheel, or Whizzy Wheel for short. They have nicknames for everything.
And you got to show off the bottle you got. Come on, show it off.
All right, I will do that now, because what is
I was like, when I first saw this, I was like, wow, the NSA gave Jeff a bottle of bourbon. I'm like, that's really cool.
So I have a friend that it works. He and a couple business partners have this distillery in Southern Maryland called Tobacco Barn, and they do a lot of private label bottles for special events for a lot of the 3-letter agencies and government agencies. So he brought this to me yesterday. Let me know when you can see it and read it.
I can see it. That's so cool that they laser etched that.
Cool. Yeah.
So, and he got after me today because I put a picture of it up online, and he said it would look a lot better if it was half empty. So here's a toast to Tobacco Barn Distillery. I am drinking the straight bourbon whiskey that is the one-of-one bottle for my cipher wheel going in the museum.
So, Jeff, you did a cipher wheel, which is not, it's an encipherment back in the 1980s, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And that was used by Special Forces. So one could assume pretty reliably, I think, that was pretty state-of-the-art for field-based cryptography, not academic, not used in a high-security environment, but enough for military folks to use in the field, if you will. All right?
I would disagree a little bit. I mean, the one-time pad is the highest form of encryption because it is not computationally, mathematically feasible to break it. The only way you can get to the message is if you steal the key, and in theory, there's two copies, one on each end, and it's
Right.
written on paper, and as soon as you use it, you're supposed to destroy it. One-time pads were very commonly used during the Cold War, and NSA would produce them. And the ones that were in the field, let's say, were very often small enough to fit in the heel of your shoe so that somebody could hide it very easily. And very often it was the letters or the characters that were printed on the page, which are essentially key. Um, they were printed on rice paper so that the destruction method was literally eat it. So all those old spy movies, Get Smart shows you see where they're eating the codes and the secret messages, that's literally how they would get rid of the keying material.
Cool.
So, I mean, special forces have, through the years, have had very high risk missions. Very often they're dropped in behind enemy lines, they're dropped into less than friendly territory, and they have to have reliable communications. And in those days, they were mostly communicating by Morse code. That sometimes they would type in the message and end up using a burst radio to send the message very quickly. But I get what you're saying about the lower grade encryption being used in the battlefield. That is very
Right.
true, but not for special
Okay.
forces. They have sort of a
Let's
specific
let's
mission.
leave it at it's vaguely military grade for the moment, just
Mhm.
in terms of a time period. So in the
Sure.
late 1980s, encipherment and one-time pads were pretty good. Okay, till today, not huge amount of time later. Shut up, young people. The, yes, Dave, I'm talking to you. And we're talking about quantum decryption, being able to decrypt asymmetric encryption
Mhm.
by brute forcing it almost on the fly if they get good enough. And this is where it goes back to cryptocurrency because asymmetric encryption are the addresses on cryptocurrency wallets. And so if quantum decryption happens, they'll be able to steal all the cryptocurrency that's out there that's not quantum resistant. This is an incredible span of technology in 40 years.
How soon is quantum going to be able to break the blockchain technology or
So
the cryptocurrency?
I've got a pat answer for this because I've been asked this. I can't tell you how many freaking hundreds of times in the past couple of years. And the answer is a while. Bear with me. The first, but it's not going to be like a light switch. It's not turning it on and off. The first people that are going to break quantum decryption are going to be nation states. And then a few years later, it'll be large multinational corporations who built the nation state, the systems anyway. And then it'll be large organizations. Then it'll be medium organizations. And by then, your phone's going to be a quantum computing phone. Now, my estimate for that first step, when nation states will be able to break it, is actually getting shorter. I'm down to 3 to 5 years.
We should start a Kickstarter right now to buy your own Bitcoin breaking machine.
Well,
Yeah,
Australia,
and then in 20 years we'll have it, and then
it'll be useless.
it'll be useless because what happens if you can break it all? It means you can steal it all, but then someone else with another quantum computer, I should say, can then break what you have.
Yeah.
So is it just going to be like a race of just cryptocurrency exchanging hands of whoever has the biggest quantum computer?
I thought that was ransomware.
Well, if we can back up a little bit, I would like to cover a little bit of the history of the way cryptographic systems were designed and built in my era at NSA. And I want to put this ultimately in the form of a question to you, Josh, of how much of this sort of discipline that went behind designing crypto systems 30, 40 years ago still applies today, and does it still apply?
Okay.
Because, in my early days of what came to be known as the pit, I was actually working for an office that did fielded systems evaluations. So we were evaluating the security of systems that NSA had designed and built and put out into the field of all levels. And we also participated in the design of new systems. And there were some very exacting standards that had to be applied. And one of the standards was trying to calculate using Moore's law. And I always assumed Moore's law was top secret, and Moore was somebody that worked at NSA. Little did I know that he was out in the private sector. But
Every 18 months, hour doubles. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. So we would and sort of to your earlier comment about the strength of encryption systems for the battlefield, I always like to tell the story that, there are classification levels, there are different sensitivities of messages. Like if you're on the battlefield and you need to call in an airstrike against the enemy position, that's extremely important information to get it right and have it be accurate, and get it to the right people. But as soon as the airstrike's been called in, that information, who cares if anybody can break the message and figure out what the message was? So the need to protect that information is a relatively short time period.
Right.
Whereas on the other end, if you're finding out the deepest, darkest secrets of your adversarial third nation state enemy,
Yeah.
so the Soviet Union, in the historical context, and you're finding out information that was only known by, let's say, in theory, three people in the whole country. Uh,
And at
gosh,
the
what?
Soviet Union, two of them are dead. Okay.
Right. You need to protect that the information in the first place. B, you need to protect where and how you got it, what we call methods and sources, because you're going to put people at risk. Let's say you had somebody that was termed that was acting as a spy, and they're in the conference room with just a few other people, and they're leaking that secret. Or maybe you've compromised the physical location. There's bugs in the wall, and there's lots of famous now public stories about how the Russians, the Soviet Union, would bug American embassies. There's a famous
Typewriter.
NSA seal, the typewriter. We've talked about that over the years.
Yeah, they used to also plant them in the walls as they were building them for us because we idiots let them build the walls. Anyway, go
Right.
ahead.
Whole nother story. But some of that stuff you need to protect kind of forever. I mean, you never
Oh
want
yeah.
to let some of that information. So there was certainly mathematical
They were fake.
calculations done to figure out how strong an encryption system was based on brute forcing.
Right.
And so that's another sort of mental note of part of the question that I'm asking. And then there was the cryptography. Can you actually break the code? Can you break the cipher by finding any kind of weaknesses or bug or misconfigurations? And that's where fielded systems evaluations came in, because somebody, and I don't know who the person was, but somebody very astutely noticed that on the operations side of NSA, the code breakers, the people that were listening to everybody else in the world, somebody decided, very often we were breaking the communications of our adversaries by taking advantage of the fact that they didn't use them correctly. Like a one-time pad, for instance, is unbreakable if you use the one-time pad key one time. But if you use that page for a day or a week or a month, you're introducing cryptographic vulnerabilities, and the whole system will fall down. The best example that I can give you is the Enigma machine. Most of us have probably seen the movie Imitation Game, and we know that the Enigma machine was broken. Technically it was broken by Polish cryptographers, I think in 1938 or 39.
Jeff
But
was there at the time. It was amazing.
yeah, I was in diapers, but they let me play. Thanks, Paul. What we're seeing in the movie was really Alan Turing coming up with a way to do brute force quickly by creating an automated
It
machine, what
was
is the
not
precursor to the computers.
the Bombays were brute forcers, yes. That they broke it, however, because of repetitive cultural aspects of the messages that were done. However,
Absolutely. But and that's the cryptographic weakness. They started every message with the same phrase, Heil Hitler. And so when you have a little bit of that, you can start to cut corners. And when I was there, a cryptographic attack was considered anything that reduced the work effort to solve the problem by 10%. That was the definition of a cryptographic attack.
interesting. Okay.
Not necessarily breaking the whole thing, but reducing the work effort by 10%, based on what they think is brute force, and then going
Okay.
backwards like that. But my point with the Enigma machine is it was broken in the late 30s, let's say 38, 39. When I went to work at NSA in 1986, the fact that the Enigma machine had been broken by Allies forces was still secret. And it was kept secret until 1998, 99 timeframe. So a good 50 years. Why? Because people were still using it somewhere. And the fact that it had been broken had been kept a secret for 50 years. It didn't matter what the information was that was being transmitted. And I think in the final days, it was like, I was told this is folklore, but it was low level diplomatic traffic type of thing. It wasn't the most secret stuff. But somebody was still using it, and it was kept a secret that it had been broken for 50 years.
Jeff, what was the book about the female females who were working basically in cryptology, right, for the U.S., and they were mostly based here in the States, and they were working to break codes while all the men were off, actually fighting in the war. What was that book? Was it code? Was it
I'm
Code Breakers or Girls Who
maybe
Code? Was it Girls Who Code? I think it was called Girls Who
I
Code.
think it's Girls Who Code, because
Yeah,
I was looking at the bookshop at the museum the other day, and
yeah,
they had a copy of Girls Who Code, and I took a picture of it. I didn't buy it, but I took a picture of it to remember to buy it sometime.
yeah. But they
And
were
it
saying so.
wasn't just the U.S.; it was very much the
Yeah, yeah,
British and the Poles,
sure.
all the Allies.
But in the
Um,
in that book, they yeah, and I believe it is Girls Who Code. Yeah, no, maybe not. But in any case, I'll look it up as we go.
let's
But
roll with it.
roll with it for now. They were doing research for that book and interviewing people, and some of the, obviously they're older now,
Mhm.
and they still would not divulge all of the secrets.
Right.
Like that's
Yep.
There,
how closely guarded and how
there are
serious
actually,
they took it.
yeah, there are actually stories and shows that have posited using former scientists with dementia to bring back like smallpox and stuff
Mhm.
because they know how, and you put them in a lab and they muscle memory everything,
Mhm.
but they
Right.
don't know they're doing wrong, and you just walk in with with old IDs and they go, oh, and they do it for you. Like there's a lot of
Code Sorry, it's called Code Girls: The Untold Story of the American Women Code Breakers of World War II.
Code Girls. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for looking that up. Um,
So
but
what
to
was your
put all
question?
that in the form
Yeah,
of a
what's your question?
question, when it comes to the quantum computing power and the fact that the asymmetric, the public key systems are what's vulnerable now to, or will be, or is hypothesized to be, brute force attacks.
Right?
Um, you know, what happens to all the traditional symmetric cryptography that's out there?
Ah,
Um, and is there a concept of Moore's law anymore, or is that blown up by quantum computing? Uh,
actually, they believe that Moore's law will come back into effect because of quantum computing. Moore's law was put in abeyance for quite a time because computers got so damn fast, and then we realized we don't need anything faster. Like, do you need for your basic office worker to have more than 8 or 16 gigs of RAM? No.
Yeah. If you only want to have one Chrome tab open, that's
That's
fine.
true. You get the idea. So we stopped building for, massively much faster computers. We're still
right,
doing it, but we went from building faster cores to more cores, and then from more cores to aligning clusters of computers together and things like that. So instead of making individual computers and individual processors faster, that's all about Moore's law.
right.
We stack them now instead.
Mm.
Okay. With quantum computing, they believe that Moore's law will, for at least a little while, be back in effect because they think
Hmm.
it's going to have just as much. Holy crap! This individual processor, we're going to be able to iterate and make it that much faster, that fast.
But quantum computing, Josh, asymmetric or symmetric, are both in jeopardy, or just the
No, not
asymmetric?
really. Symmetric. Let me start with symmetric. Symmetric is going to be about twice as fast.
And
Um,
just for clarification, just for the people that might not know this, symmetric encryption means you're using the same key to do both the encryption and the decryption, and so that key has to be shared, or you
Mhm.
both ends have to know how to derive it and come up with it. But it uses the same key for both encryption and decryption, where asymmetric and public key is a key pair. One is a private and one is a public, and the public key you give it to anybody and they use it to encrypt a message, and only the secret key that you hold tight can be used to decrypt the message. So back to you, Josh.
Well, hold on. Before Josh, there's a book called Crypto by Steve Levy. So if you're digging what Jeff said, because Jeff, you're explaining it like very much how the book explains a lot of the cryptographic algorithms in the history.
Mhm.
It is Crypto by Steve Levy. Amazing book. Like, while we're on the topic, and as we're getting ready to like kind of dig into encryption topics for the next 2 months, 100% go read that book.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it goes through the whole history of it, and just I got a newfound appreciation for the systems that are in place today from that book. Great job. Anyway, okay, so now, and also don't forget about Canadian encryption, symmetric A. So
So
Josh.
I'm going to hit you so hard. So the concept of quantum computing and symmetric encryption is a linear increase in attacks. In other words, it's rule of thumb. It's going to be about twice as fast at brute forcing. Okay, quantum computing.
Okay.
That's an easy way to think about it, which
Mhm.
is not bad. It means that if you're using like AES 128, just switch to AES 256. It's a fairly negligible difference. Okay. However, for asymmetric, because of the nature of the algorithm, it is effectively exponentially faster. In other words, it is technically it's logarithmic, but we're not going to get into that.
Well,
Effectively,
it has to do with the math involved.
Yeah, it has to do with the math
Essentially.
of it, which means that as you accumulate more quantum power, the speed at which you can brute force it goes down very, very fast. Okay. Instead of like I've doubled my quantum computing power, I can double I can get it in half the time I can brute force it. No, now it's a quarter of the time,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. So it keeps getting smaller and smaller by larger steps.
Yeah, and I'm sort of having an epiphany here because I've never really myself quite understood what the difference was, but the way you're describing it, and maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I mean, like when we were designing algorithms back in the day and crypto systems, we would always assume when we were doing testing of it that the adversary knew everything about, and in most cases we were building devices, little black boxes type of thing, but we assumed that the adversaries had gotten their hands on one, had reverse engineered it, had the instruction manual, knew everything about it, and we still had to make it secure. And the reliance on the security was really the protecting the key and the length of the key. And I think that's safe to say for all symmetric systems is the strength and the math isn't really what's important. It's the length of the key, and of course the key needs to be random, that type of thing.
But
Whereas with asymmetric cryptography, it's all about math.
Yep.
It's not about key, it's about the math.
And to be clear, with asymmetric, you've got two groups that have never exchanged keys, and that's the kicker here. They've never exchanged keys before. Each one generates a public and a private key. The public key can decrypt private key messages. The private key can decrypt public key messages. The public key cannot decrypt public key messages, and the private key cannot decrypt private key messages.
You said that almost right, but I'm with you.
Basically, it's like this.
The public key only encrypts, the private key only decrypts, and you got to have two sets.
That's not true.
If you want to have two-way communication.
That's absolutely not true. The public key can encrypt, the public key can decrypt. The private key can encrypt, the private key can decrypt. The public key can only decrypt, the private key can only decrypt public key messages. The public key can only decrypt private key messages, and vice versa.
I don't think that's right.
It's 100% right. They're both keys. You could literally swap them and use a public key for your private key, and it would work just fine. And you could publish your private key.
Okay? I don't doubt that it'll work. I don't doubt that it'll work.
The way I understood it, and Josh is making sense in the context of when they talked about when like Whitfield, like Diffie and Hellman were creating this technology that didn't exist before in public key cryptography. Right. He was like, the epiphany moment was, what if we would take the key, like in symmetric encryption, and break it in half, right? And this is essentially what they did. And I'm oversimplifying, grossly, right? But like the way I understood it was broke the key in half, right? It's just two parts of the key.
Right.
And one you give out publicly, and the other half of the key you keep to yourself.
Right. And by the way, Paul, if I was wrong, you couldn't verify a message. You couldn't sign a message and verify it.
Right. that's where the math in is so amazing and way beyond my comprehension. And the story I like to give, I shared in the show a few years ago, was I had, because I'm disorganized, this kind of mess of SSL certificates and keys, and I didn't know what went to what. And then when I researched it, there's like an open SSL command that can tell you, like, oh, like this private key belongs to this public key, or this uh, something was something other operation I was doing. And I was like, well, that's really cool. I'm like, how does that work? And then I Googled how that worked. And then the articles look like hieroglyphics to me. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm just going to trust that works. I'm going to save the OpenSSL command and I'm just going to trust that works. But I think back to Josh's point that it is beautiful. I do want to give another shout out to another resource on this topic, and that is the podcast Security Cryptography Whatever, that I've talked about on the show before. Thomas Tacek, Deidre Conley, and I forget the third host name. These are, I mean, Jeff is our like resident cryptographer in the house, right? The rest of us are like a a kind of hobby
Amateurs.
understanding. Yeah, it's an amateur hour. No offense to anyone, but I'm pretty sure that we don't put ourselves in amateur hour. Bill's like, no, wait, totally a cryptographer. You just hit it really well all these years of our friendship, Bill. I get it. But like those folks are absolutely like very, very, very deep into all of the modern crypto systems as well, and bring on. I mean, when they talk, I literally have to like, I can't listen in my car because I have to like literally take notes and like go look stuff up and then go back. But it's an amazing learning experience and great show. So make sure you check it out if you like this topic.
You know, it's a good podcast or show or talk when you're furiously Googling stuff going, oh, now that makes sense.
Yes.
I have no freaking clue what that meant. Hang on. Oh, no. And when you have to go 3 levels down to find something that makes sense, and then you can start interpreting and learning the levels up, you're like, damn, that was good. No, I do that all the time. I'm on several cryptography mailing lists, and kudos, by the way, Tamsin, if you're watching. Hi, love you. One of my friends, Tamsin, runs the admin on the Metzdowd list, which is an amazing list. And it is amazing some of the topics that get batted around, like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what the hell are they talking about? And I have to go and like seriously work on the stuff to figure out some of this. It's crazy. No, but in all seriousness, so back to the asymmetric cryptography.
Yeah.
So asymmetric cryptography, it's much easier for quantum decryption, quantum computing systems to brute force them. Okay, so far so good. So what's the big deal?
Yeah, something about qubits. Like
there's a whole thing about qubits, and there's physical and logical qubits. Which
like the thumbnail for this one should be like me taking a big puff on a joint, going, the qubits, man. It's all about the qubits.
Well, at the risk of oversimplifying the way I understand it, and I'm not a mathematician, but it's not like there are two halves of the keys. It's the two keys, public key and private key, are used together to create a very, very huge number, or they're derived from a very, very huge prime number. And it's the difficulty historically has been in factoring the large prime number back, getting down to the right public and private key. And that is what is enabled by quantum computing, is that gets done a lot quicker. And that's the brute forcing that's happening.
Exactly. In traditional computing, you can do one operation at a time. Okay. Quantum computing can do multiple operations at a time because it has
qubits, man.
The superposition. That's the thumbnail.
Qubits. It's all about the qubits.
But
well, Bill is keeping up with his one-word contributions to the show. That's great.
So in talking about podcasts that are so good you have to look stuff up, I actually just did that and I'm on it. So earlier in the show, we asked Josh, how long is it going to take for quantum decryption to be a thing to where we can crack Bitcoin wallets? I asked that question of 2 different LLMs. One is ChatGPT, their new 4 version, and I also asked Perplexity. ChatGPT basically said somewhere between 10 and 30 years, and it did it in a very short, succinct manner. Perplexity, though, gave me not only the history of different types of cryptography, it also, and it came to about the same thing somewhere between 10 and 15 years from now. It also gave me several references to a topic known as post quantum cryptography and referenced some projects that NIST is currently working on. So that's an area of science I had no idea existed. It's referred to as PQC, which sounds kind of nifty. But there are people who are working on this in the same way, Jeff, that you were assuming that somebody had already gotten a hold of what you were working on and you had to protect things. So it sounds like they're working the same model, assuming that it's already broken and then trying to find ways to compensate for it.
Well, let's talk for 1 second about the timeline. Australia just dumped $620 million into building what they call the utility scale quantum computing center. IBM now sells modular quantum computers. You can buy a quantum computer for your house. It's only 2 qubits. It's basically only for learning how to program in the quantum sort of setup and environment. But the factors, the pieces are there to make this do a rocket jump, okay, to make this do a breakthrough in the very near future. I firmly believe.
Dare I say a quantum leap?
Oh my God.
Oh my! It was only a matter of time before someone made that comment.
And we're there.
Wow, that was a really nerdy moment.
Just call me Ziggy. Okay.
I just have to bask in the nerdiness of that moment for a second.
They're bringing that show back, I think.
They are.
Oh, it's been
I
back.
think 3 to 5 years, 3 to 7 years, somewhere in there. And we're going to see the first breaking of some kind of asymmetric encryption by a quantum computer.
So I would love it if the Good Judgment Open, the super forecasting site, put that question on there. I look there too. They have nothing about quantum computing at all.
Really?
Or quantum encryption. Yeah, it seems like exactly the kind of thing that would be right up their alley.
I would bet I would actually, if isn't there a wager site that does long-term wagers? Is that the one you're talking about?
It's not necessarily a wager, but it's trying to crowdsource forecasting the future. Good Judgment Open. It's a fun activity if you're into that sort of thing. But they will ask questions of the crowd and it's got an interesting history. It's kind of fun.
No, I'd be willing to put money down that it's going to be within 7 years, like decent money.
Bitcoin.
So anybody interested, hit me up. At least $1,000
in Bitcoin, because if it gets cracked, it
do
becomes worth a lot less.
Well, wait, what's $1,000?
I'm willing to bet $1,000 that there will be, and the problem is, of course, that we won't know it because it's going to be a government cracking another government's asymmetric encryption. But I would be willing to bet $1,000 that within 7 years, the first asymmetric encryption will be broken by a quantum computer.
How long before Bill and I can go on AliExpress and order cheap knockoff quantum computers, though?
20 to 30 years.
We'll all be in the retirement home trying to buy those.
So we have we have a loose timeline. Talk to us a little bit about, or let's discuss a little bit about what's the impact of breaking asymmetric cryptography to
the internet goes down
to the general public.
Well, you can't buy anything off Amazon or eBay. You can't use your credit card. You can't log into your bank. You can't, because everything you do that's e-commerce based. Remember, we freaked out for 15 years about look for the padlock. Look for the padlock. Okay, that padlock is asymmetric encryption.
That's exactly how we all said it too, in that same voice. Look for the padlock. That's what we all said.
We all channeled Paul's grandmother.
This is true. Look, the basis of the internet, HTTPS everywhere, the padlock, e-commerce, all of this stuff is based on asymmetric encryption because your computer doesn't get introduced to Amazon's server. They've never talked. And so we need a way to exchange keys across the internet.
Exchange what kind of
symmetric keys?
Symmetric.
We need a way to create a secure channel for a short enough time to exchange the symmetric keys that we can then use symmetric encryption. By the way, symmetric encryption is not infinitely, but it's significantly faster than asymmetric. Asymmetric is painful to do. So what we do is
and that's an important distinction, Josh, to make.
No, it is.
All the encrypted web traffic out there is symmetric encryption.
Yeah,
that
it doesn't
you
matter.
Get there through a secure exchange of the keys that are done using asymmetric. So they're both involved and they're both vital
And how do we know? But how do
to
we know that's
e-commerce.
Amazon's key? Oh, certificate authorities, right?
Yeah. And so the gotcha there is where Jeff started, right? So when Jeff started, he was talking about if, with symmetric, it both encrypts and decrypts, right? And so if you get that key, right, you can decrypt everything going forward.
Mm.
So digital preppers are now looking to buy Jeff's whiz wheel in order to compensate for this when this happens.
And they could do that. All they need is, again, a way to get 2 copies of a very secure key on both ends of the communication.
One step ahead of you. See, I got one
Yeah, I
right
was gonna
here.
say, didn't you release the plans, or can't someone buy that to make that on a laser cutter or something?
Or a
Or
3D
did,
printer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking there should be 3D printers like step
Now,
files for
here's
it.
the problem. How do you tell him which setting to put? Let's say I have one and Paul has one. How do I tell Paul to which setting to put it on if I don't call him?
yeah, you just do it on the
no
podcast.
We
there
just
are
do it.
no
We just do it on
settings.
Signal. We just do it on Signal. But if
Yeah.
is Signal also vulnerable to quantum?
No, they just came out with
Pigeon.
post quantum crypto. They just installed post quantum crypto on Signal.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Apple did it on iMessage,
Chrome.
and somebody else did it as well.
Wasn't it Chrome? I listened to your podcast earlier.
Yeah, Chrome.
I believe you said.
So I
that.
just
But-
Signal messaged my credit card to Amazon. We were good, right?
To clarify,
Fine.
if I may, my wheel is simply the algorithm. The strength of a one-time pad, which is what it was used with, was there's only 2 copies of the key in the world and each end has it. There's nothing secure, there's nothing secret, there's nothing private, there's nothing at all confidential about the wheel itself. It's just simply a cipher wheel version of a vignette table. Is that how you pronounce it, Josh?
But here's the problem. The biggest problem in cryptography is key exchange. Period.
Absolutely.
End of story.
Right.
There is no bigger problem.
Which
Because
used to
if
be
I-
solved pretty quickly with asymmetric cryptography, public key cryptography, but that's going away. So we have to come up with
No,
a
it's not.
new way of
No, it's
doing
not.
key exchange.
No, it's not. We're changing the algorithms that we do it with, but we're not changing what is done. We're still going to be using asymmetric cryptography. We're simply going to be using different cryptographic algorithms that are different, admittedly, but the idea
And named after either Star Trek or Star Wars monikers.
well, yeah. I mean,
So
is that a
all the new quantum approved encryption algorithms are still based on a public private key pair.
Yeah, they're still based on the same sort of methodology. They're using a different cryptographic algorithm, but they're still based on the idea that it's going to be an asymmetric encryption where there's going to be a public private key pair, and we're going to do a key exchange using that.
Whereas in the old machine cryptography days, there was the concept of a ComSec custodian and 2-person control, and keys were physically delivered to the recipients on both ends in hopefully a secure physical manner. Which I'm not saying is scalable in this modern world, but maybe part of the post-quantum solution is to kind of rethink everything. And is public key the way to go, or is there another way to do it? But that depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to accomplish e-commerce, that's kind of, I think, what we're stuck with. But I think there's an important distinction, and this is something I've thought about for the last year or two. When I was in the business, we were basically, the office that I worked for was originally called Communications Security, ComSec. We were just worried about keeping secrets safe as they were being transmitted back and forth. There wasn't really a concept of data at rest. If you had secrets that you wanted to keep safe, they were written on paper and they were kept in a locked safe, in a locked room, in a barbed wire controlled facility. So I think it's important to consider, even in our modern times, what is the intended use, and if most of it is for communications, the transmission, which is essentially our e-commerce and everything that the internet does, so be it. But what about the secrets that we want to keep safe, that we're storing, that's data at rest? Is quantum computing impacting those?
No,
types
but
of
typically data
secrets
at
at all?
rest. So the actual questions here are a little bigger than that. Let me explain. So in HIPAA, we came up with the idea of data at rest and data in transit, right? Everybody knows those now. So data in transit.
When did HIPAA come out?
2013.
Okay, so
No, that's the new.
I think we
that's
had
the
that concept before 2013, but
yeah,
continue.
PCI
no,
at
that's
least
the-
had the concept in 2004. But go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, but who
42
cares?
minutes in before we have a PCI reference.
It's not too bad.
cares
For the
about this?
record, for those of you playing along at home, if you're betting in the pool,
Believe you're drinking now. That's
the
part of
answer
the
is
game.
42.
Okay, so the answer is 40. It's always 42.
Right.
No, but in all seriousness, at rest and in transit. And in transit is the asymmetric stuff we're talking about, where the difference is that the pluggable encryption algorithm will be changed to make it post-quantum crypto. That's how they were able to do it so simply for Signal and iMessage and Chrome and so on.
Mhm.
For at rest, we've pretty much been using symmetric because, again, it's faster. And typically at rest data is much larger, terabytes, petabytes of exabytes of data. So you want to use what the fastest encryption method possible. And so that's why they use symmetric encryption. It's much faster. It's much
Fastest / cheaper. I mean, there's an implication
Well,
of cheaper,
well,
more efficient.
Well, it's
How do
going to
you
depend on
measure-
the industry too. Like
Yeah.
some organizations are going to use like older hardware. They're not going to update their stuff. They're going to be more vulnerable as time goes on, where actually we might actually get to a point where certain industries are being affected by post-quantum cryptography issues, having been cracked long before others do. Like,
Well, remember,
real
the
soon.
idea here is time. Every encryption algorithm is vulnerable to time. If you keep hammering on it, you will break it. But if it's 5 million years from now, I don't give a shit. You want to see my bank records when I'm 4.5 million years in the grave? Go to town. You know, you want to see all my medical records and all my non-existent nudes? Go to town. I don't care. Okay. But like you want to
Non-existent.
I know.
Right.
The fact that he mentioned that means that they do exist.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I
And
said
we
they do
never
exist,
we never want to see them,
do
Josh. Love
exist.
you, but you know,
Speak
in our
for yourself,
minds,
man.
they're non-existent. Okay.
Speak for yourself. I've been searching for them left and right.
And if Bill
Been
can
on the
find
dark
them-
web and everything.
Yeah. So, Josh, I do want to go back, and I know you're trying to get a point, but something that you said a minute ago, I don't want to get lost with.
Go for it, man.
So one of the things that you said that the pluggable encryption algorithms made it very easy for Signal and Apple to implement, and I want to kind of understand that because I want to understand your point on that because from what I understand, it's not necessarily trivial to replace that algorithm, right? So, and that's why everyone hasn't switched to
Right.
post quantum,
It's not
resistant.
trivial, but it's possible. And you also have to have the sending and receiving end have to have the same cipher suite. If you've checked your compliance frameworks or if you've done some updates of your routers and switches, you have, hey, have we deprecated the cipher suites that are deprecated by our manufacturer? Oh, what do you mean? Well, SSL 3.0 was deprecated, said don't use this anymore. How many years ago? And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You say, okay, we still have SSL 3.0 on 4 switches or 4 routers or whatever. Oh, no. Turn that off. So you go into the configuration and you turn off SSL 3.0, right?
That's often the weakness though. And we talked about that when I was on Application Security Weekly, talking about the Crush FTP vulnerability.
Yep.
And they still used a weak hashing algorithm. What were they using? I don't remember now. It was it doesn't
one?
matter. It doesn't matter because what I said was
or whatever it was. I don't remember. Yeah.
There has to be a process and we have to be diligent about following that process to go which cipher suite, hashing algorithms, whatever the context is it the modern version that is resilient or is it an older version that is not resilient? And if it's the older version, we have to update it and not wait until someone exploits it or finds a vulnerability. We have to be diligent about doing this.
So that's why TLS 1.2 and TLS 1.3 and eventually TLS 1.4, and then we'll deprecate SSL 3.0 and TLS 1.0 and 1.1, and we'll turn off the old ones and we'll turn on the new ones or add the new ones or install the new ones. But the problem is if I say, oh, I'm going TLS 1.3 and only TLS 1.3, and that's the only connections I'm going to accept, and your biggest partner and customer goes, we do TLS 1.2. We haven't done TLS 1.3 yet. You can't talk to them. Mm-hmm. So that's why there's always this tug of war is which, and everybody does sort of, all right, they're going and we're going to go. And it takes time to get everybody moved over to that.
It's been 10 years at least, by the way, Josh, since
For what?
since SSL3 was deprecated.
Was it 10 years? Jesus Christmas.
But we saw
Oh,
the same thing with Wi-Fi
Mhm.
in the different
yeah.
encryption,
How
from
many
the WPA, and
802.11b do you still have?
it's it's still a thing. Not
Yeah.
as much, but it's
Do you
still
use
out
it?
there. It's still
Yeah.
out there.
It's still out there. And so everything's back. And how many years were Macintoshes and x86 computers just hamstrung because they had to have, like, in every x86 computer there was a 386.
Just for you youngins out there, by Macintoshes, we mean Apple.
Fuck you. But in every Intel based motherboard there's a 386. Did you know that? And a 486 and a Pentium, because for backwards compatibility they literally have sort of fragments of those processors in there, so they'll still run these old programs. And so the idea here is that, do we want to just shut everybody off from using anything that's not quantum protected?
Right.
No, we can't do that. That's silly. So there's
It
going to
has
be
to be a slow, to just, sometimes it takes 10 years to fully deprecate and get rid of those older vulnerable protocols, if you will.
Well, you adjust your risk profile based on how you're communicating. So if you have a partner who isn't communicating accordingly, then you say, okay, we can only do these things with you, or it'll cost more, or we will only do it under these contractual agreements. I mean, there's a ton of examples for that. I don't see them commonly used though. It's usually sort
Windows
of a,
XP. It's very common. Windows
well, yeah,
7, very common.
fair.
Medical manufacturers use Windows 7 extensively and ridiculously.
Yeah.
And so
Or
they
We have a
Windows
legacy
embedded.
problem, but the legacy
Yeah.
operating systems, are they going to be able to even implement some of the
no,
newer encryption protocols that are quantum resistant, right? So this
no.
legacy is a trickling effect.
But my point is, those legacy operating systems, you pay Microsoft enough, they'll keep sending you security patches.
Please
Okay.
update your
Up to a
surgical
point.
robots
And
off of Windows
there's
7.
nothing
Thank you.
important running the legacy operating systems anymore, right?
Certainly
Like
not surgical.
ATMs or critical infrastructure or transportation.
But back to David's point, that's a risk profile issue. Is this meet your risk appetite? If the answer is no, then you've got to do something about it.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, this is a risk and business issue, not necessarily a technology issue. Do you
But
care if your traffic is being harvested by Chinese or the NSA now, and that it'll be decrypted in 5 years? I've been telling companies, on your data classification matrix where it says restricted and confidential and internal only, add a column and have it called data half-life or data danger period.
Yeah.
If your
You
data,
actually
good.
you actually have to do the risk profile to begin with, though. Many organizations don't. They just buy stuff, plug it in, and assume it's okay.
It works. Then we're done.
And
I
why did
love
they
when
do that? Because the vendor told them to. Trust
the vendor
us.
told them it fixes everything. It cures baldness. It dices. It splices. It circumcises. It's the Black and Decker Pecker Wrecker.
But
Look,
wait, I want to go, but I want to put this in the context of SSH, right? We've seen a number of different changes in the protocol over time, but that means I got to issue new keys,
yep.
right? This is like, yes, I've had older that are vulnerable keys to quantum decryption. I've
Well,
transmitted
again,
data with
if
those
you
older keys, and that data could, if someone captured it, could be decrypted. But moving forward, I have to reissue keys, and we get into the
well,
key management
maybe not.
nightmare
If
again.
you physically input your key into the server, you don't have to reissue the key because it was never a key exchange over the internet. There was no opportunity for someone to intercept. So if I walk up to a server, plug a flash drive in, say, pull my key off of it, that's my SSH key, and walk away, you're fine. That's a symmetric key.
Yeah, but
This may be a dumb
that's for
question,
data
but-
at rest. Go ahead, ask a dumb question. Sorry.
Yeah, please, and correct me when I'm definitely
No,
wrong.
that's a
But
nice
couldn't
question.
somebody quantum up a rainbow tables equivalent of assuming that, like basically pre-crack that key, then bring it over to that server, drop it in, and just keep running until they find that key? Or is
I don't.
that too
That's a
simplistic?
good question. I don't think so. I don't think it works that way. But
Well,
my
I think
math,
the oversimplified answer, but hopefully it'll make sense, is if you're talking about a rainbow table, you're talking about brute forcing in the sense that there's some gazillion number of keys that you need to try. And the idea of a rainbow table helps to accelerate the search rather than generating a key at a time. Um, the the idea of the quantum is we're not talking about gazillion numbers of keys. We're talking about two keys that have a solution. There's a factoring problem involved.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the computational power of quantum comes in. When you're talking about rainbow tables and brute forcing the keys or hashes, as it were, it can be either. You're talking about some large number that you're trying to predict, and it's easier to do it with a rainbow table if you can generate them ahead of time. In that context, I don't think, from what I'm hearing from Josh, there's any leg up with quantum computing other than just the regular advance of computing power over time, which was described by Moore's law.
Thank you, Jeff. I
Am I
appreciate
more or
it.
less right with that, Josh?
I believe you to be correct. I don't guarantee it.
Yeah,
I'm not an expert in quantum. I'm okay.
I don't believe
I
me to be correct either. But
yeah, I actually think you're correct on that.
Yeah.
So, but also, I mean, like one thing that that I kind of want to talk about. It's not necessarily the increase of speed that quantum computers bring in. It's just the different way that they calculate math, right? Or not calculate math, but the way that they execute on that problem, right? I mean, so it's not just that these quantum computers are faster; they're computing differently. Does
well,
right? I mean,
it's a
I have that right,
huge
right?
distributed processing program, parallel
For,
processing program.
right. So the way that I understand it, and I love how each one of us is putting this big asterisk. I might be wrong because we don't really know,
Right. Right.
but the way that I understand it is that quantum computers are more similar to the way that our brains work, right? So if we were to ask, if I were to ask a human, show me a picture of a duck, you immediately, oh, I know what a duck is, and you draw it. And the way computers work right now is they say, is this a duck? No, it's a cow. Okay, go to the next one. Is this a duck? No, it's a dog. Okay, until I find the duck, here's the duck, right? And what it is it's more of a parallel processing way, that just kind of the way that the human brain works is the way that I understand it.
Well,
I
and a
like how we all
rainbow,
have our own analogies about
right?
how both encryption and quantum computing work.
What if you
Hmm.
gave a quantum computer ADD? How would that work? Would they show you a duck and then immediately a squirrel?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What I was gonna say is to extend the analogy to the rainbow table, the computer would know to at least look at the D's section first to get to the duck, and
Mhm.
not have to start at the letter A and go from A until you happen to get to D. And God forbid you're asking the computer to draw a zebra.
That's a whole nother topic. But no, in all seriousness, the problem here is that we have a period right now where our information is getting harvested, and we don't have really good quantum secure protocols in place. At some point, we will have quantum secure protocols in place, battle tested. All right. From now until the beginning of that period, that's the problem. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, but and so Josh, I'm curious, and I feel like you're going to have a very clear answer on this. But as a normal non-government person, what data am I sending that that would be potentially crackable in that 5 to 7 years that I care about, right? Like
Your bank
in
records,
it,
Bank
your financials, the nudes that you send your mistress.
yeah, see,
or your
but
bank.
bank records and all that's already subpoenaable, right? Like if the US government
Oh, no,
wants
no,
it,
no,
they
no,
can
no,
go
no, no,
get
no,
it.
no. It's not the U.S. government. It's the fact that the Chinese government is harvesting every bit of information on the internet, pretty much, and there's several governments doing that, including our own, which is fine.
But
But
Josh, what you're not saying, if I may interject real quick, we talked about there's a need to do a risk analysis, and risk by
Mhm.
definition has to include the threat. Now, in the old days, the threats were the Chinese, the Russians, the whoever it is that is your adversary that's trying to get to your information. So
Canadians.
I think part of a symmetric A I
Symmetric
think
A
if we're
poser.
talking about risk profile, we do need to start bringing in all those other elements that we've sort of ignored over the years and think about who wants this data, how valuable is the data. And I like what you were saying, Josh, about the idea of the data half life, because the classification of data in the world that I came from was almost exclusively about how long you needed to protect it. How long did you need to keep this secret safe? It wasn't.
Right.
I mean, I remember when I was working on the operation sides, breaking codes and ciphers, and I would decrypt something. One time I decrypted something, and it took me like weeks to figure it out, and it ended up essentially being a shopping list. It was like a grocery list, and I'm like, what the hell is top secret about this? The answer was, how did we get that message in the first place? And how did it get to my desk in Fort Meade, Maryland from somewhere else in the world? And the method and source of us getting that message in the first place, that's what is classified and top secret and needs to be protected for 7, 10, 20 years forever. We don't have that
So,
concept in the private sector. Of we have
but we do need it.
but
Here's
we
the
need
thing.
it. We
So, Bill,
absolutely need it.
the idea is if somebody can steal something from you using that kind of data, your intellectual property, your plans for world domination, your plans for your next company, your trade secrets, whatever, that's one thing. And the other thing is anything they can use to get leverage over you. And those are the two things you have to be worried about. Make sense?
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So the nudes.
The nudes, the bank records, if they want to steal from you, the plans for world domination, if they want to.
Bill's nudes are out there though, so I mean,
I know.
It's hard to avoid
Yeah.
them. I cheat.
Well, yeah,
like, oh,
but
geez, dude, horrible.
if everybody's seen you nude, then it's not
it's not a big
critical
deal.
that your news
That's
get
right.
compromised.
His
So-
OnlyFans actually pays you to subscribe to it, so it's it's cool.
Good thing it has the zoom feature though.
Yeah, I think
Zoom.
right. That was a very like the
Evil.
zoom feature on cameras was very beneficial, right? But Josh, I think you're right. So the leverage aspect is the right way for I think you're exactly right. So I don't know if I assume. Well, I assume most of us have probably held a clearance at some point. I know Jeff, you have, uh, but it really some of the things that they're looking for is how could someone gain leverage on you, right?
Sure.
So that's
Or
an
your
interesting.
company, or your organization, or your
Mhm.
department, or your boss. What gossip are you putting out there over some kind of messaging system across the internet that talks about your boss's mistress or gigolo or whatever? What are what ways can we use? Oh, look, there's 5 of them that are looking to quit. What if we could modify in real time the messages to make them even worse
Mhm.
and make you quit? And then all of a sudden, there's an entire department at that company that's going to fail because 5 of you quit, and then the company fails. Leverage is huge, and I'll shut up there.
So, what do you think so how worried should people be right now, and companies, people, and what should they be doing about it?
Honestly, people shouldn't really worry about it too much. It's so far in the future that anything they can do, unless you're doing something really horrible, they're not going to have much leverage on you. But organizations that have trade secret that information that has a longer data half life than say 3 to 5 years, and it's important for longer than that, what they should be doing is they should be using symmetric encryption. They should be sending out effectively one-time pads, and Jeff can wax rhapsodic about them, but they should be sending out keys, whether they're like RSA style keys that change every 60 seconds, whether they're one-time pads packed with 10 years worth of keys, whatever. But the important thing is that you handcuff a zero Halliburton case to your wrist for maximum 1980 style drama.
Football.
And then you send that person around to your major customers. You open it up, you hand them their set of keys, and you go to the next one. Because then there's no key exchange, and the symmetric encryption is safe.
But I can give a couple examples just based on the clients I've had over the years in the private sector. Years ago, I worked for pharmaceutical companies.
In 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds. Pharmaceutical companies, they'd come up with a formula that, for a drug that would, cure a disease. They've got patent rights, they've got privileges, but it's finite. It's 7 years, 10 years, something like that. That's how long they need to protect that data. I worked for a paint company one time where, the formulas for paint are actually something that they care about. That's privileged, private, confidential information. But that particular type of patent, if you will, is only good for like 2 or 3 years. So they only need to protect the secret formulas for 2 or 3 years. That's just 2 examples. But you got to know what you have and how valuable it is, how long it needs to be protected.
As an alternative, you can ask an AI to help generate a list of Canadian encryptions using appropriate stereotypes. You can generate something called maple cipher, encryption, Mountie lock, or poutine protector, all of which
Oh my
could
God.
help secure your environment.
And with that, we'll take
Oh
a
my
break.
God.
I only thought there were 3 forms of encryption in Canada.
Mountie lock.
Poutine protector.
If you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I could explain it better, or I know someone that could explain it better, we want to hear from you because we'd love to have them on the show.
Please.
Listen, I'm barely hanging on as a guest in this show. And if you do that, you're going to take my place. So don't do it.
So with that, we will take a short break and come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned.